In this video I'm going to cover the changes to the Retribution Paladin with the Battle for Azeroth pre-patch. My fully loaded Essentials guide will be out for the release of the expansion itself in mid-August, but with the designers still tinkering with specs, I don't want to commit that to the interwebs just yet. This video guide will cover baseline changes, talents, our rotation and a word about stats and legendaries, everything you will need to adapt to the last month of Legion before the great citizens of Azeroth head off to Kul Tiras and the savages smash their ships into some jungle called Zandalar. So in terms of some baseline changes you need to be aware of, like everyone else, we're losing all of our Ashbringer and Relic traits. Remember, some of those gave us extra abilities like breaking out of stuns, for example. Some of them reduced the duration of our Forbearance. That will now go up to what its baseline is already, which is 30 seconds. That also means the duration of our Avenging Wrath / Crusade will come down a bit as well. Bear that in mind. Divine Storm, I suppose, is the bigger one, because instead of going forwards, it will now go in a circle around us. That will also mean that we get to hit things behind us. So it means instead of being on the edge of groups and firing it through, we want to be in the middle of groups and do it around us. Some cooldowns have changed on abilities that might appear to be otherwise the same, such as Crusader Strike. Those could still be changed again though, so for now I'll just say beware. For the myriad Blood Elves out there, Arcane Torrent has been placed on the global cooldown and no longer interrupts. It removes buffs instead. So although it still grants a holy power, because it's on the GCD, it is to be used as a filler only. Lowest priority unless you happen to need the utility aspect of it. Now one big change is our mastery. When in Legion Alpha they introduced the mastery that we ended up with for Legion, there was a lot of people weren't very happy with it, myself included, and we just said, look, why can't you just have it buff all our holy damage? Well, hurrah, that's what they've done now. So our mastery now just straight up buffs all of our holy damage being of course the majority of the damage we do. Avenging Wrath has changed in two key ways. One, at first sight it looks like, oh, lower percentage, it doesn't do as much. But in actual fact, when you look closely, you'll see that not only does it increase damage and healing, but also our crit chance by that 20%. That is an overall buff on what we had before. It is also, however, on the global cooldown. So if you're in the habit, as I'm sure you are, of firing it off at the same time as a spender, especially with Crusade, that will no longer be possible. You'll have to activate this, wait for the global cooldown to finish, and then activate your next ability. You may find this a little bit jarring, but you do get used to it. Art of War is a new passive which effectively mimics the Blade of Wrath talent. It does the same thing, only on a slightly lower proc per minute. At the moment, it's 2 procs per minute, but again, that's one of the things that in tuning could be changed. Judgement was a key ability in Legion, and it's a key ability in BFA, but in a different way. Not only does it generate a holy power now, so we don't want to be using it on 5 holy power. That would have been a great time to use it in Legion, not such a good time to use it now. But also it does debuff the target, but it's a consumable debuff. So it buffs your next holy power spender used on that target, but it doesn't cleave to any other targets, which means that that buff will only apply to any damage done to that primary target. Don't try and game this debuff to use it at optimal times. Judgement is a high priority, as we'll go through later. Just use it, forget about it, don't worry about it. Don't think about a Judgement window anymore, it doesn't exist. The Retribution passive is still alive. They have nerfed it. They recognise that it's a terrible idea, but they can't get rid of it for reasons. But they have nerfed it. It's basically the same, only instead of lasting for 20 seconds, it now lasts for 10 seconds. So thank heaven for small mercies, but it is still there. Shield Adventures has also had 3 very crucial changes. 1, it's on the global cooldown, so watch out for that. 2, it will deal damage at the end of its duration, even if it's not fully consumed. This is a big improvement. The damage it deals will be equal to the amount it's absorbed. And 3, it only scales with health now. It doesn't crit, and it's not affected by any of your other stats. Only health. The only way you can buff the Shield of Vengeance is by taking a stamina flask. Don't take a stamina flask. Now, when it comes to talents, this is where we're going to be spending most of our time. There's been so many changes, new talents, some talents have gone. What I would say is, unlike in Legion, there aren't really what you would call dead talents. All of these talents have their potential uses. Sure, some will sim higher than others. There isn't a set of talents that you would take now in every circumstance. There are some that are simming at the moment higher than others in many situations, and of course I'll go through that once I've been through all these talents. Now before I start, I will also say that do note that all of the talents down the left hand of each row are considered the easy talents to take. So if you're not comfortable with a lot of things, taking those talents means that you don't really have to think about them. So on the level 15 row, we have Zeal, which doesn't do what Zeal did in Legion. Instead, what this does, when you use your Judgment, your next 3 auto attacks will occur a bit faster, and they'll also deal holy damage. That holy damage, like all holy damage, is buffed by our mastery. At the moment, this is simming to be the best one to use in all situations. Do sim yourself though, just in case, and of course, Blizzard are still tuning, so things could easily change between when I've done this video and when Battle for Azeroth launches. Righteous Verdict mimics the effects of the Whisper of the Nathrazim cloak, which of course you could use at the same time if you so wished. It is a little bit more generous on the window because it's 6 seconds as opposed to 4 seconds. The effects will stack for the 4 seconds at which the buffs would both be active at the same time, by the way. Finally, Execution Sentence. If people thought Judgement of Legion was like Colossus Smash for Warriors, well, the Execution Sentence really is, isn't it? This does damage just like Execution Sentence did in Legion, but the important part of it is it places a debuff on the target. That debuff means that all holy damage, not just from spenders, all holy damage is increased for 12 seconds. The important thing with Execution Sentence, however, you could look at it and think, well, you need to use it at ideal times when you can get the most holy damage out. No, you use it when it's on cooldown. That cooldown is not affected by haste. It's going to be a flat 30 seconds. Costs 3 holy power just as it did in Legion. On the level 30 row, we have Fires of Justice. Now, Fires of Justice does what it did in Legion, but there's a slight change. Instead of a flat 1 second reduction in the cooldown of Crusader Strike, it's a 15% now. So that's going to have a lower effect on the Crusader Strike, but otherwise it does the same thing. It reduces the cooldown of Crusader Strike, and it gives you a chance to get a buff, which means that your next spender costs 1 holy power fewer. It's the sort of thing that might be used when you have a considerable amount of downtime. It might see some use, you should sim it, but by and large this is probably not a talent you're likely to be using. The next two are generally more powerful. But with Blade of Wrath and Hammer of Wrath, it sort of depends on mastery and haste. For example, Blade of Wrath doubles your Art of War procs, so that basically means it does what Blade of Wrath did in Legion, except it now also buffs the damage of Blade of Justice. Now, Blade of Justice is of course a physical damage dealer. Hammer of Wrath, on the other hand, which sort of does what Hammer of Wrath did before it was removed in Legion, which for those who haven't played before Legion, is it's a ranged ability. It only works during execute phases. That means when your target is below 20%, or when you've got Avenging Wrath or Crusade active. It generates 1 holy power. It has a relatively short cooldown, but it does holy damage. So if you have a lot of mastery, then that means Hammer of Wrath is going to do more damage. Whereas if you don't have very much mastery, it could be argued that at that point you might find that Blade of Wrath will sim higher for you. So which one is best for you may well depend on your haste and especially mastery. So this is why it's important to sim these talents. On the level 45 row, we've got our standard crowd control. They're all pretty much the same. Do note that Fist of Justice has been nerfed a little, but apart from that, they're basically the same and they all do the same thing. So on the level 60 row, we have a new talent in Divine Judgment. So every mob that is hit by a Holy Power spender gets like a stacking debuff on it, which means that the next time you use Judgment on it, then that damage is going to be increased by 20% for each Holy Power you used on it, stacks up to 15 times. This is more likely to be useful if you have the tier 21 2-set bonus. So raiders are very likely to use Divine Judgment for this pre-expansion patch part. Maybe not so much when BFA launches itself and we get into our level cap gear, but of course tuning is still to be done. The other two on this row are Consecration and Wake of Ashes. Now, Consecration has been massively improved. One of the big problems with Consecration is that because you place it down and the duration is the same as the cooldown, that means if mobs die or if the tank moves mobs out of it, you're wasting a lot of damage. It doesn't actually do very well. However, now, although the cooldown is 20 seconds, It does its damage over 6 seconds. That makes it much, much better. So as long as the mobs are going to stay in it for 6 seconds, you're getting full use out of it. It's also, as you might be surprised to learn, very good for single target as well. But all of these talents on this row are effectively AoE talents. In a change to Battle for Azeroth, Consecration also generates 1 holy power. It doesn't need to do any damage to generate the holy power. If you use Consecration, you will gain 1 holy power. Wake of Ashes, you'll notice, has an increased cooldown. However, the cooldown could be changed at any time, but at the moment it's got a 45-second cooldown. Other than that, it does very similar things, but not identical. You'll notice it still generates 5 holy power. It can still stun undead and demons, but for 5 seconds. It still puts a slow on, but for 5 seconds. It does a cone of radiant damage as before, but it doesn't apply a dot anymore. Remember, we've lost our traits from the Ashbringer. Some of those traits have been baked into other abilities, and many have not. As with Consecration, the 5 holy power generated by Wake of Ashes, unlike in Legion, doesn't have to hit a target. If you use Wake of Ashes, you will generate 5 holy power, even if you don't actually deal any damage. For the level 75, the main change is Unbreakable Spirit. We no longer have access to Divine Intervention. No more Cheat Death, no more Auto Bubble. What Unbreakable Spirit will do is to reduce the cooldown of your Shield of Vengeance, Lay on Hands and Divine Shield by 30%. If you feel that you might need to get Divine Shield on the go a couple of times in a fight, you may want to take this. The next choice would be Cavalier. Cavalier does what Cavalier has done throughout Legion. In a fight where you might want movement regularly, then you might want to take Cavalier instead. Either way, you are going to have to manually operate your Divine Shield. Do remember it's on the global cooldown. Eye for an Eye does what Eye for an Eye did before. It is a decent physical damage reduction, but for raid purposes, because there's very few fights where physical damage is a big factor for a DPS, not ideal. However, for dungeons, you may well get more use out of it. For solo, certainly. On the level 90 row, we have Selfless Healer, which is a new talent compared to Legion, but we have had it before. There's a slight difference to how it worked before. This time, when you use a holy power spender rather than Judgement, then the cast time of your Flash and Light is reduced by 25%. It stacks up to 4 times, which means you can get it to be instant cast if you use 4 holy power spenders before you use a Flash of Light. That means you can use it on the move. It also buffs the healing it will do by 10% per stack, so up to 40% extra healing. Some players quite like this because, as I say, on the move it does give you that heal that you can use. The alternative on the other side of this row would be Word of Glory. Word of Glory has also been changed and generally, I would say, has been made a bit better. You can now target it on someone up to 40 yards away. What it would mean is the target will get a heal as well as 2 others, so it's fewer targets healed than before, within 30 yards of them. Still got a maximum of 2 charges, still uses Holy Power. If you use it with an enemy targeted, it will still self-cast on you and heal 2 others within 30 yards. Gives it a larger range than it did before, which potentially makes it more useful. In the middle, of course, we have Justicar's Vengeance. With this one, it has been weakened a little. Do not try and consider this to be of any DPS benefit, whether direct or indirect. What this is an expensive self-heal. It may be useful to you in some solo situations, but if you are going to use Justicar's Vengeance, only use it, only see it as an expensive self-heal. Finally, the level 100 row, we have Divine Purpose, but it's changed a bit. So there's still a chance, albeit a smaller chance, for it to proc a free Holy Power Spender. But what it also now does is it buffs the damage and healing of that Holy Power Spender. Crusade still behaves very much as Crusade did in Legion. Do note that it now only stacks up 10 times, so it's a little bit quicker to get it up to max efficiency. Also note that the duration is greater than for Avenging Wrath. The duration is 25 seconds as opposed to 20 seconds for Avenging Wrath. Finally, Inquisition. We didn't have this in Legion. What this does is it provides a buff that we should maintain at all times. You can use up to 3 Holy Power on it. Obviously, you don't choose. It will just take up to 3 Holy Power, depending on how much you have. And it will give you a buff that lasts for 15 seconds for each of the Holy Power it used. The buff increases your damage and haste. Now, the value of this has been changing a little bit. It's now 7%. At the moment, this is simming to be the best one to use in all situations. Now, the way the buff applies is very important to understand because it uses variable amounts of holy power. So if you have at least 3 holy power and you use Inquisition, it will give you the buff lasting for 45 seconds. But then let's say you build up another holy power and use it again, you can actually stack it up to a minute. However, let's say you apply it and get your 45-second buff. Then you do a Blade of Justice and you have 2 holy power and you try and do it again. It won't allow you because it would waste a full 15 seconds of holy power. So in other words, if you have 2 holy power, you will not be allowed to apply Inquisition until you are on below 30 seconds of duration left. If you're on 3 holy power, it will not allow you to use it until you're on like below 15 seconds. If you're on 1 holy power, it'll let you use it, as long as you're below 45 seconds. A little word of caution here. It is possible to have both Divine Purpose and Inquisition via the Soul of the High Lord legendary. There is a bug. I don't think it's high priority because it's not a bug that's going to affect us once we get to level cap in Battle for Azeroth. However, if you have a Divine Purpose proc and you apply Inquisition, it will not only consume the proc as you would expect, but it will also consume what holy power you have. That means you're paying twice. So the rule of thumb is do not use Inquisition if you have a Divine Purpose proc. Use it on a spender first. Even if Inquisition isn't even active, it's still worth doing that. The other important thing about Inquisition, and this is really crucial, do not let it run out during an important DPS window. This includes Avenging Wrath and Execution Sentence. Most especially Avenging Wrath, because you're definitely going to have that. Because Avenging Wrath lasts for 20 seconds, make sure you have over 20 seconds of Inquisition before you apply it. So which talents do we want to take? Well, as always, you need to sim for yourself, but a good rule of thumb is the following. Zeal is looking the best for the first row. I wouldn't expect it to last. It's going to be a bit shitty if the easiest talent, the Fire and Forget talent, is the one that we end up using in all situations in BFA as well, but for now it sort of is. Now with the amount of mastery in our current gear, it is likely that Hammer of Wrath will sim ahead of Blade of Wrath for you, but they can jump ahead of the other depending on stats, so you need to sim yourself. Divine Judgement, as I've already said, in all probability is what you're going to be using if you have the tier 21 2-set bonus. Otherwise it's between Consecration or Wake, depending on the situation or your own preference. Inquisition is still king of the last row. Again, we might be seeing a little bit more of a nerf from it or buffs to the other two, but in the here and now, you're probably going to be wanting to take Inquisition. However, perhaps what you'd like to do to break yourself into it is to change as little as possible while getting used to the baseline gameplay, in which case you could take Zeal, Blade of Wrath, Wake of Ashes and Crusade, and the spec will play the most similar to Legion. And then once you got used to a few things, maybe then you could change the talents up. Entirely up to you. Now, when it comes to the action priority list, as I've said before, but I'll say it again here, only use Divine Storm on at least 3 targets, not the 2 that we do in Legion. Remember, we've lost the artifact traits that mean that Divine Storm is useful on 2 targets. However, if you have the Divine Judgement talent, then you can use it on 2 targets. It becomes worthwhile with the extra damage your Judgement will do. Now, the top priority, if you take it, as is likely, unless you really don't like it, is Inquisition. I've already said don't allow it to fade during important windows. If it will, refresh it ahead of time. Don't wait until you're ready to use that window and then refresh it. Now, Execution Sentence, if you take this, don't wait for the best time. Bang it out as soon as it's ready so that it lines up with your Avenging Wrath. With 30-second cooldown, that means that every 4th one should hit your Avenging Wrath. Next in the priority is, of course, to spend if you are on full Holy Power, or if you have a Divine Purpose proc that's about to expire. Don't waste your procs. Next would be Wake of Ashes, but only do it on, ideally, less than 2 Holy Power, unless there's some weird situation for which you need the stun on an undead or demon. Next would be Blade of Justice. Just don't overcap with this. Because of Art of War, we want to be using this as very high priority. Judgement is also very high priority. Again, don't overcap. Remember, it's a Holy Power generator now. Don't use it on 5 Holy Power. Next would be Hammer of Wrath if you've taken it and it's available. Same rule, it's a generator, so don't overcap. Make sure you use it on 4 Holy Power or fewer. Next is Consecration, same rules. It's a generator, don't overcap. Crusader Strike on 2 charges is the next one. Then spending if you're on 4 Holy Power or if you've got a Divine Purpose proc. And then finally Crusader Strike. If you've got nothing else to do, of course, spend with whatever. Now, if you are using Inquisition, which is likely, then activate this before firing off Wings on the Pull. It is going to seem a little bit jarring, the opener, if you've taken Inquisition. You can get away with a 2 Holy Power Inquisition if you don't have Wake of Ashes. Now, if you've got Wake of Ashes, you could fire off Wake of Ashes, you've got 5 Holy Power. Use your Inquisition, then Avenging Wrath. Don't have to build to 3 first. Then Avenging Wrath, and then go straight into it. Of course, if you've got Crusade, you probably want to get your 3rd Holy Power. But if you use 2 Holy Power Inquisition, that will give you a duration that would last the Avenging Wrath duration of 20 seconds easily. So you could just go in, say, if you don't have Wake of Ashes, Blade of Justice, Avenging Wrath, Judgement, carry on. So a little word on a few bits and pieces. Now, when it comes to legendaries, again, you're going to need to sim yourself. However, this is what I found looking at my character. Soul of the High Lord is looking the best. This is because Divine Purpose has just recently been buffed. It's looking quite tasty now. Just remember what I said about not using procs on Inquisition. However, different people are simming different secondary legendaries. Now, I was finding that Chain of Thrain was looking really good for me. But in another set of gear, Sephir's a Secret was looking really good for me. Some people have found Whispers of the Nathrazima looking good for them as well in different gear combinations. So it's super important that you sim yourself for the type of fight that you're interested in. In terms of enchants, Mark of the Hidden Satyr is looking to make a comeback. Do sim it, but that's what I'm going to be using. And when it comes to stats, with all the tuning going on, this might change like twice a day between now and the expansion coming out. It's probably not going to, but it could easily change. But assuming it doesn't, you can be safe going for a hefty amount of haste. But as I always say, don't think in terms of secondary stat priorities. Think in terms of, okay, go to raid bots or some other simcraft program and go, well, is this piece of gear an upgrade on what I already have? So hopefully that'll tide you over for the pre-patch for the few weeks before I can do my full belting Essentials guide for the Battle for Azeroth expansion. As soon as I am confident enough that Blizzard are not going to change anything significant. If you've got any questions, do ask them below. Come on stream and ask me there as well, the usual thing. Don't forget that all the Retribution Paladin theory crafters can be found on the Hammer of Wrath Discord, as well as a number of other Ret Paladins who can help you out with any specific questions that aren't covered in the FAQ. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share with other struggling Rets who might find this useful. And until next time, I'll see you later.